The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Should students still pursue a higher education? We'll explore that tonight. Then, a new report finds that not enough housing is being built for students. We'll look at what's behind the housing shortage. Finally, we'll take you to Queen's Lakeridge Health Campus to show you how they're addressing Ontario's family doctor crisis. That's all ahead on the agenda. Pursuing higher education used to be seen as a stepping stone to greater opportunities in life, a foundation in one's academic journey, a launching pad for your career. But is that still the case? Joining us now to discuss all that and more, we welcome in Sudbury, Ontario, Jennifer Scott, Dean of the Faculty of Education and Health at Laurentian University. In downtown Toronto, political columnist Sabrina Mado. And with us in studio, Eileen DeCourcy, Vice President Academic at George Brown College, and Alex Usher, President of Higher Education Strategy Associates. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
I don't know about you all, but I still get that dream or that nightmare that I'm at university and I have a paper due the next day and I've read 0 books. It's just me. But before we start our conversation, we actually took our camera to the streets of Toronto not too long ago to ask people whether they think there's still value in pursuing higher education. Let's take a look.
Do you work in the field you went to school for?
No, I don't at this time.
Do you work in the field you went to school for?
I used to, absolutely.
And what did you do and what did you do in school?
I did a master's of library science at McGill, and then I was a librarian at the Ministry of Education.
I actually do not. I am completely different in the field I'm in now. I'm in technical recruiting.
And what did you study for?
I studied for communication studies.
Do you work in the field you went to school for?
Not really, but like it's related.
Yes, I work in the field that I went to school for.
And so what did you do in school and what do you do now?
I got a bachelor's of education at university level, and then I was a teacher for several years.
I went and I studied urban development, urban planning, and I work in real estate investments, so pretty much same thing, yeah.
Do you think getting a higher education is still worth it today?
I do, because it helped me to think better. It helps me to articulate my thoughts better. It helps me to develop ideas and work with others. It helps me understand higher concepts.
I'm very fortunate that I got to go. I know it's crazy expensive. It's too expensive in our country, if you ask me, but I'm very fortunate that I got to go, and I loved every minute of my education. I think everyone is entitled to at least a university education, if not more.
I think it gives people a wider range of options to consider when they're looking at different jobs that may be available now. Of course, the job market's changed since I graduated from university in the mid-80s.
I think so many companies out there that I work with in recruiting value seeing university degrees, and I think just also building that camaraderie, building relationships. I was able to acquire my job through referrals and whatnot, and I think that's valuable. The more people you meet, the better opportunities you can have.
And do you think getting a higher education is still worth it today?
Well, it can be controversial, but I do not think that. Like, I think maybe like the system can change. Like you can change the way things are. Maybe some 5 years careers can be different.
Do you think getting a higher education is still worth it today?
Yeah, I think it is, dependent on what you're doing. I don't think it's worth it just to go kind of get like a blanket degree just for the sake of going to university. But if you have something you're passionate about, then yes, I absolutely think you should. And then especially if you're going into STEM fields, so anything engineering, mathematics, software engineering, stuff like that is absolutely worth it. But like if you're just going for the sake of it and just getting a random communications degree, I don't think it is. Especially if you're taking out student loans, definitely not worth it. But yeah, if you have a passion for something, I think so.
Jennifer, I wanted to start with you. Why do we go to university in the first place?
An excellent question. I think that there's a couple different reasons for students attending university. Some professions definitely demand that university education. There's those professional schools like Teachers College, nursing, engineering, where you have to have that accredited degree. And there are many others like that in order to pursue that employment later. But other students, for those other subjects, like in the sciences, social sciences, humanities, in that case there, students are going there to achieve that higher education. Let's say they're going there to expand their thinking. They're going there because they are very interested in that subject. They want to engage in that subject, learn more about it. But in the midst of doing so, they're also learning all the important intangible skills that you're gaining in university, that critical thinking, problem solving, the ability to adapt to different changes, communicate. So that's ultimately what they're getting out of the end. They're going to learn how to think, and grow from there.
Eileen, I don't want to put you on the spot because you're representing a college, but there seems to be a little bit of a hierarchy between going to college and university. Is one better than the other?
Well, certainly they both have value, and it really is dependent upon what the individual wants to do in terms of their education and their profession. So as an example, when we think about a college education, many people think of a college education as it was in the 1960s or the 70s. The colleges in Ontario have really evolved, and we know specifically in the GTA in Toronto, the colleges refer to themselves as polytechnics, right, which provides an opportunity for an individual to start in a certificate program, move through in pathways to a diploma, to a degree, and now they have the opportunity soon to be able to do postgraduate certificates and graduate degrees in applied masters. So certainly when we think about the value of education and we think about the value of a college education, students often pursue that because they know exactly what they want to do in their profession, and they're coming to get hands-on practical skills that get them job ready, provide them with a professional network and a social network so that they're ready to practice as soon as they graduate.
Sabrina, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but Alex, university isn't for everyone, and you say that students have become more utilitarian now. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think there's been a broad turn maybe in the last 15, 16 years or so, where students, as Jennifer said, there's lots of reasons people go to university. I think the weighting in students' mind about short-term returns seems a little bit heavier in their decision-making than it was, say 20 years ago. You do see that in surveys of students and why they want to go. And you certainly see it, I think, because young graduates young students are making more than they used to. Actually, it's what you can earn while you're a student has actually gone up quite a bit. So their opportunity cost of going to school has been a little bit higher. And so they're a little bit more careful with how they spend their time, and they want to make sure they're doing it in a way that is remunerative.
Well, I mean, when I went to university 20 years now, I'm seeing more friends of mine who are like content creators making way more money than I am. And I think the value of a journalism degree doesn't carry the same weight as it did maybe 20 years ago. And so you say we're in a skills economy, and that doesn't mean it's an education economy. What do you mean by that?
When people say they want skills, right? When employers say they want skills, governments often react and institutions often react as if what they need are graduates. But graduates have knowledge. They've sat through some classes. They don't have as the experience. And I think that's really what people want. So when people say, gosh, we have this skills problem in plumbing, or we have this skills problem in digital marketing, they don't mean let's go get more students in. What they mean is I want people who have a degree plus 5 years of experience, or a diploma plus 5 years of experience. So it's actually, they're talking about training problems that happened a long time in the past. So I think for a lot of institutions and for a lot of governments, the onus or the priority for the last few years has been to try to get students to have more experience while they're in their studies, what they call work-integrated learning. And I think colleges have always had a step on universities in that. That's always been their stock in trade. But I think you see more and more programs in institutions right across the board that are trying to deliver those kinds of opportunities to students while they study.
And rules around internships have changed in the last few years. And you see a lot of discourse online, the frustration that young grads have. They finish school, they apply for a job, but that job insists on like 3 or 4 years of experience. Sabrina, you believe that we've lost track of what university is really meant for. Why do you say that?
Well, I graduated back in 2010, which is the period that's been referenced by a couple of the other answers. And during that era, especially if you grew up in a city or the suburbs, the answer after high school was you were expected to go to university, simply because university was what you did. And in some cases, that made sense for people's educational goals and careers, but in a lot of cases, it didn't. And so what ended up happening is you had lots of young people going to university, but leaving with a lot of debt, not being able to find jobs afterwards or being able to find careers in their field of study. And at the same time, again, being expected to have 3 to 4 years of experience for an entry-level job. I also graduated in the era of unpaid internships, which have since become illegal. So the path back then was you would graduate, then you would work for free for a couple years, and then maybe you would get an entry-level job. But even today, we're seeing young people with the exact same struggles, graduating with huge amounts of debt, not being connected to the workforce after school. And not being equipped to contribute to the economy in the areas that there are skill gaps. So it seems that we have lost our way in terms of the true purpose of higher education for both students, but I also think our broader economy and society at large.
When you're going to university, there seems to be like this hope of like, this is what I'm going to do. You graduate, and then you have this hope of what you're going to do afterwards. And Alex, you have a report that shows the employment rates of university students in Ontario after they graduate. We're going to bring up that graph, and we can see two lines. Sheldon, could you bring that graph up, please? One line is in blue and one is in red. The blue is 2 years after students graduate, and the red one is 6 months after graduation, and it covers the years between 1996 to 2020. We can clearly see that since the financial crisis of 2008, the employment rate of graduating students hasn't recovered. Alex, getting a job after graduation seems to be taking longer now than it did, say, 20 years ago. Why is that?
So there's three things that happened around 2008 that I think are important, and I think Sabrina sort of alluded to one of them, which is, hey, there was a really big recession then. It was tough to get jobs for everyone. But there are two other really big things that happened in the years before that affected the way that graduates navigated their way through the economy. And the big one on the university side was we doubled the number of university students we were teaching in Ontario. So we had the double cohort back in 2002, and then that expanded the size of universities, and the university said, let's just keep bringing in more people. So there were now more graduates going after a similar number of jobs. Rick. So when those students started coming out, that's 2008, 2009, 2010, suddenly there's a lot more people with these qualifications competing for jobs. But the other thing is that the people who had these qualifications were quite different, right? So, half the students who were graduating in 2008 would not have graduated in, say, 1988, right? They wouldn't have been in university. So
explain that for us, please.
Well, you take if you imagine universities taking 20% of the top 20% of the academically qualified students in the province, suddenly they're taking the top 40. That second quintile is a very different group of people. You have to you teach them a different way. They're interested in different things. In many cases, I think universities were not ready for those students. I think they've gotten better at teaching those students now. But the point being is that you've got a different composition of students, you've got a larger number of students, and you've got a recession. So there was a lot that happened, and it took about 6 or 7 years for the labor market to catch up to actually need all those graduates. We got ahead of it. If you look at Ontario and how graduates have been doing since about 2014, 2015, it's quite positive, right? I mean, humanities students, those are the ones we always, wring our hands about. They're not only is their employment rate up over where it was 8-10 years ago, their incomes are up about 14% after inflation. So you know what I mean? Like I think there was an adjustment period that we went through. We've gone through it, and I think the system's working pretty well right now.
Eileen, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think that the one thing you were talking about in terms of students and graduates unable to get a foot into the job market, and I think that's where the colleges and the polytechnics are very well positioned, right? So our programs are really based on learning by doing, skill development, behavioral change, really looking at what the industry needs. Every single one of our programs has what is called a program advisory committee that is made up of industry professionals who not only guide the curriculum and the curriculum development process, but also speak to the competencies that are in demand. And they also provide work integrated learning opportunities for our students. So every student that goes through to a college program, almost every, will have the opportunity to gain that practical experience either in the college itself through simulations and labs, but also through the work integrated learning experience. So the whole idea is that they actually have the skill and the experience to enter right into practice. But not only that, is they have the professional network. So when we think about, and at least when I went to university as well, I floundered in terms of trying to get a job, because when you graduate initially from your undergrad, where do you go? Where do you develop a professional network? At least that was in my time. But now, our students have those professional networks built into their learning experience. They're networking all the time with industry professionals so that they have that opportunity to be able to easily transition into the workplace. Now, it doesn't always happen, but the opportunity is there for them.
Well, you mentioned networking, and we were talking a little bit about the financial crisis of 2008, but COVID also disrupted education in ways we haven't seen. I can't even imagine being a young person graduating from high school or even college and then heading into the world when you're dealing with COVID. Jennifer, what ripple effects did that have on higher education?
Oh, goodness. There are so many factors that had. You have the students that stayed at home, not getting out. They got used to that hybrid way of learning, that remote way of learning. So getting them back into the classroom. They also got used to having everything at their fingertips all the time, all the answers that they would be searching for because they're on their computers constantly. So there's that very responsiveness when they're asking their own questions online and trying to find it themselves that they got very used to. So coming back into the education system, they have to come to class. They have to communicate with their professors in person, hopefully, sometimes online as well. But that's taking some adjustment. Definitely, there's missing chunks of their education as students did try to go through COVID. So we're going to see this ripple effect go back many years as those students are now coming through the system. It's not just going to sort itself out in a couple of years. That's mainly on the math and science side of things, I would say, but also on the humanities and social sciences side of things as well.
Sabrina, you talk about housing. A lot of people value the advice you have on the housing crisis. And if you're a young person, when you finish school, we have this idea, you go to school, you get a good job, and then you start building towards your future. But you say that one of the biggest failures we've had is not encouraging people to go into skilled trades, even though these industries, we really do benefit from them. For example, in housing. How have we failed?
Absolutely. Well, one of the side effects of what I spoke about before, demanding that university was the natural next step, was that we kind of ignored and abandoned the skilled trades. We actively discouraged a generation of students from going into that type of training. And now we see we have massive gaps in that sector, despite these being very purpose-driven jobs, despite the need being there, and actually quite high salaries as well. So we're playing catch up at this point in time. And still there's a lot of work to do there. Governments, especially the Ontario government, has started to address, pathways to apprenticeships, better advertising opportunities in the sector. But there's a lot more we can do, especially with the gender gap when it comes to the skilled trades. We're still not getting women into those sorts of jobs. And how can we better get them on those educational pathways? It's interesting. The average age of an apprentice in Ontario right now is still 27 years old. So we've had a lot of people who have come through the academic system. They found themselves in a lot of debt without jobs, and now they're just starting their journey into the skilled trade. So how do we make that happen sooner?
Do you think too, because I remember when I was in high school, there was this kind of idea, well, don't go to college, go to university, and don't go into skilled trades. Do you think that there's still a little bit of that kind of like snobbery around pursuing skilled trades? Because when you go to university, when you go to college, there's this idea that it exposes you to a bigger world, it develops your critical thinking, which kind of implies that people in skilled trades don't have those skills, which is obviously not the case. But do you think there is a little bit of that, Sabrina?
absolutely, unfortunately, there's still a stigma that's lasted because when you discourage something for years and years and years, of course that takes time to undo. Like I said, though, skilled trades make great salaries in terms of social skills, critical thinking. They're problem solving all day, every day. They're working with clients, with their teams. So I absolutely don't think that the idea that universities or even colleges are the only way that you can build those skills, whether those are social skills, independence, or critical thinking skills, that's just not true. There are other ways to develop those, and we should be highlighting those and encouraging those, and also helping to educate both young people and parents who play a large role in what their children decide to do after high school about these opportunities and the benefits that come along with them.
Jennifer, I'm going to come to you next, but Alex wanted to.
I just want to jump in because I think a lot of what we're, the lack or the inability to get young people into the trades comes from a set of decisions that happened in the 1990s when we just more or less closed up technical high schools. And so there wasn't that road in. That's not just Ontario. I think pretty much all across Canada we had that issue. The other thing to remember is in the 1990s, trades were a terrible job. Like unemployment in the trades were way into the teens, like sort of 16, 17, 18%, because we had really in the construction industries about a 20-year recession that started around 1980 and ended around, I guess, 1997, 1998. Since then, the number of people in apprenticeships in Canada has more than doubled, right? If you go back to 2000, we had about 200,000 a year people in or registered apprentices. That peaked at about 450,000 in 2013, 2014, right about the time the oil price peaked. And it's gone down since then, but it's bouncing back again. So we're back up around 400,000. That's twice as many people as we had in registered apprenticeships 20 years ago. And so the rate of growth has been about what it's been in universities. So we've actually, I wouldn't be too down on Canada on that one. I think we've done a pretty good job of that, both in expanding opportunities at all different levels.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I'd like to say I do agree with Sabrina on how there was that big push away from colleges back in the day. But then also going back to that, yes, definitely, you can not go to university and obtain all these critical thinking skills and problem thinking skills that are so important in today's society. You don't have to go to university for that necessarily. There are so many people out there without the university education that are just exceptional at this, and without the college education that are exceptional at this as well. But I feel for some students, that is the way. It's a good venue for them to achieve that next stage of their learning, those intangible qualities that they're getting out of it. So for some of those students, this is the right path to go. But there's that gap in expectations regarding why go to university and what are you getting out of it in the end? And that is a larger societal question. Why are so many students being pushed, towards certain pathways when us necessarily as a society or the employers might not necessarily understand what is it that the product we're getting at the end? What exactly are we getting out of there?
We have less than 10 minutes. These conversations are always so fascinating. They move so fast. So I just want to move ahead a little bit. Eileen, today you can learn some high-demand skills and land some well-paid jobs without ever setting foot on a university or college campus. More industries are hiring graduates with online certificates and degrees. Is it worth going to college or university if you can do that?
Of course, I'm biased, and I'm going to say absolutely it is worth going on to pursue higher education. We are at a really critical time right now in our history when we start to think about the inflection of the use of AI, artificial intelligence, and we look and think about quantum computing and how fast we will be able to think about solving world problems. And we think about, as we move forward and we evolve as societies and economies, who are the people who are going to be able to do that problem solving for us? Who are the people who are going to be able to think about the quantum computing and the applications of quantum computing in the financial sector, in the health sector, et cetera? There's absolutely a need right now for individuals to go on for a college education and university. There is value in both. I would have to say, of course, I'm biased, and I know that for a college education, students have the opportunity as well to move right into the world of work and be able to continue on for their entire life upgrading their skills. And as they do that, we can't stop learning for life. As they do that, they have more opportunity for greater earning, value and income. And so absolutely, it's really important to
Alex, I want to come back to your report because obviously cost is something that determines what you're going to do after you finish high school. And getting in debt is almost inevitable for all students. But you point out that the cost of tuition has actually been falling for domestic Canadian students over the past few years. Has it really gone down?
Well, the Ford government doesn't get a lot of credit for things in higher education, but if you care about affordability, it's done wonders because it's, they cut tuition fees for every domestic program by 10% in 2019, and they have frozen tuition fees since then. And so after inflation, I think that's a cut of about 28%. That's a great deal if you're a student. It's a terrible deal if you're an institution who has to use that, who's using that tuition money to pay for the student.
But what about higher costs for housing, for food, all those things?
But you'd be paying that whether you went to university or not, right? So, so yes, it makes it, for those students who live away from home, it can make higher education a little bit harder to pay for. But that's only about, that's 50% of students, so, some feel the benefit. And
Only 50% of students?
Well, lots of them live at home, right? I mean, like Canada's a country of very thrifty students. They like to work, they like to live at home, they like to have a job that takes them, gives them 15 to 20 hours a week. That's actually enough. If you don't have the cost of living away from home, you can make tuition pretty easily on 15, 20 hours a week, plus your summer job. So, you know what I mean? And so it's only about half the students that do go into debt. And the amount of debt that they go into is no higher now, really, again, after inflation than it was 20 years ago because governments have been plowing money into student financial aid. So we now give out about $2 billion more if you take into account all the different government programs, you take into account the scholarship programs run by institutions. We give out about $2 billion more a year than we take in domestic tuition, right? So it's about $10 billion a year in domestic tuition and about $12 billion a year in student aid, excluding loans, right? So we're not even talking about loans here.
I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that. And Sabrina, Alex said, we should give credit to the Ontario government for doing that because I think there is a perception that tuition has gone up. But Sabrina, do you think that there is a role for government to play to kind of guide students different pathways upon graduation?
I just also want to touch on financial health coming out of school. I was looking at the statistics right before us filming the segment, and for those who do graduate with debt from university, the average is now $30,000 of debt coming out of school. And then you combine that with wages that aren't keeping up with the cost of living, the housing crisis, and we are sending students out into the world set up for economic stress, if not failure. If you look at the Daily Food Bank's statistics from 2023, 46% of their clients actually have university degrees or diplomas. And even though the cost of tuition might be frozen for obtaining your bachelor's degree, we've also seen degree inflation and credentials inflation where it's no longer good enough just to get your bachelor's degree. You're now expected to get a graduate degree and maybe other certificates and diplomas after that. So it all starts to add up, and that's something that needs to be addressed for sure. And credentials inflation is actually one area where I think governments could definitely step up in an easy way that doesn't cost anything to taxpayers. We've actually seen a bunch of states do it south of the border where for public sector job postings that don't really need a degree but are currently listing degree requirements, they're transferring to skills-based hiring. And of course in Canada, we could enact that as well for federally regulated workplaces, and where the public sector and federally regulated workplaces go, often the private sector follows. So getting rid of the paper ceiling would be a really nice start.
In our last minute, I want to get from all of you 15 seconds each, please. Just final comments on this question. How can we rebuild faith in a higher education? Eileen, I'll start with you.
I think it's highlighting our alumni and really looking at the absolute incredible accomplishments of our alumni that have gone on to do wonderful things in the industry, as well as making sure that we have private sector and industry partners also really supporting what we're doing in higher education.
Alex?
Gosh, that's a tough one because I don't think that the challenge that people have is necessarily about higher education. I mean, I think, the points Sabrina made and that you made about higher cost of living, that's making things tough for everybody. But it's not something universities and colleges can do much about. I mean, other than not bringing in more international students and changing the price of housing that way. So I think it's tough. For me, the priority would be make sure the students who are there want to be there, right? So I think that point about coaching people the right way and making sure they're in programs that they want to be in and not, what their parents want to be in.
And Sabrina?
It has to make economic sense again. As long as we're graduating large numbers of young people in tens of thousands of dollars of debt and they can't find jobs where they can pay rent or even for groceries, we're going to have an issue. And of course, that's more complex than just the higher education sector. As Alex just mentioned, has to do with greater economic policy, and there's all these intertwining crises. But post-secondary institutions can certainly do a better job catering their programs to career outcomes.
And Jennifer?
I would kind of go back to Eileen's point on the visibility, showing what our alumni do, even research side of things, showing what the higher institutions are giving back to society with the faculty and staff that work there, and then also with the students that have gone on to their other jobs. And more government support too. I know they have, like Alex said, given quite a bit, but obviously more would be wonderful to feed back into some of these student-focused programs in order to create these individuals that society wants to see in the end.
Thanks so much for your time, all of you. Learned a lot from you. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Students looking to get a higher education in Canada may find it difficult to find a place to live. A new report by Desjardins says that while demand for a post-secondary education has surged, not nearly enough housing is being built for students. Joining us now to explain what's behind this housing shortage, we welcome Randall Bartlett, Senior Director of Canadian Economics with Desjardins. Good to have you in that chair. Nice to meet you.
Good to be here.
Can you just start by telling us, you've got a lot of things you could be interested in at your organization. Why this?
Well, we think this is a part of the housing affordability crisis in Canada that's very much gone unaddressed. And during a period of time when we have an influx of international students coming into the country and newcomers more broadly, we thought it was something that we should dig more deeply into.
Is it really the case that only 1 in 10 students can find a place to live who want to go to post-secondary?
So 1 in 10, there is 1 residence bed available for every 10 students at Canadian post-secondary institutions. So there are folks living with their families. There are folks that are finding other accommodations, but certainly when we look at the number of residence beds per student, it's 1 in 10.
It hasn't always been this bad, surely.
No, it hasn't been. Back in the 1970s, there was a lot of building in terms of residences across Canadian campuses, and there's also been more building in terms of off-campus residents as well. But we've seen that just that sheer number of students that have been looking for housing has increased dramatically, and we just haven't been kept up building to meet that demand. It's
probably not one thing, right? There's a perfect storm of bad things all happening around the same time.
Yeah,
like what?
Absolutely. There's a confluence of supply and demand forces that are coming together to create this crisis. And so when we look at just the demand side, we've seen a significant influx of newcomers into Canada who largely rent. A big part of that are international students. And so they're looking for places around university campuses and in university towns. That's been pushing up rents in the broader community. And so that's something that's having spillovers to the conversation we're having around housing affordability in Canada. But it's also a supply question. In the community, there's been a lot less off-campus building of student housing, but on campus, post-secondary institutions have not been investing in beds to the degree that they need to keep up with that demand. And so ultimately, it's a lot of supply, not a lot of demand, and that's pushing up prices and eroding affordability for students.
Why have the institutions themselves not been building enough?
It's an interesting question. I think that when you look at post-secondary institutions, when they send out acceptances, they don't necessarily guarantee that there are residence spots for those students, not just in the first year, but then in subsequent years as well. And so that is not necessarily always the bailiwick of post-secondary institutions investing in housing stock. Instead, they tend to focus on, obviously, the academic side of things and student achievement versus necessarily building capital assets. And so when we look at universities that have been successful, they've been those that have worked with communities and municipalities in order to change zoning to make it more accommodative to building student housing, but also some universities have created their own investment vehicles that have allowed them to build much more capacity in terms of student housing.
Now, from time immemorial, students have been commuting to university. They haven't all obviously lived on campus. Do you have any empirically provable facts that show that students prefer to live on campus in a dorm when they can, as opposed to off campus.
There's quite a bit of research out there, social research, that looks at what students prefer, but also what affects student outcomes. And so when we look at what students prefer, particularly early on in their pursuit of post-secondary education, they do prefer to live on campus. They like to live nearby where they're going to be learning. And also you have these network effects that happen on university campuses as well, where you have a lot of connections and friendships and relationships that are made. But also when you look at student outcomes in terms of the impact of commute times and potentially substandard housing that students have access to, given the erosion of affordability, it tends to increase debt levels of students upon graduation. It also erodes student outcomes, which ultimately poor academic outcomes lead to poor earning outcomes and productivity throughout life, but also in terms of health and mental health. When there's substandard living conditions, that tends to have negative impacts on that as well. So broadly speaking, not having access to affordable housing near university campuses tends to sort of erode all of these different factors for students.
Randall, I can imagine some people watching or listening to this saying, I'm not in a post-secondary institution. My kids are not in post-secondary institutions. There's a lot of things to care about in this world, and this just isn't one of them. Can you suggest to people why, if they don't have a direct connection to the post-secondary world, they maybe still ought to care about this?
Well, I think there are spillovers to the broader community that people should really take into consideration. I mean, part of that is that when students are living and renting in the broader community off campus or outside of purpose-built student accommodation, then that's pushing up rents throughout the broader community and putting those students in places that other people would be renting. So ultimately, as rents go up in the broader community, that has a disproportionately negative impact on low-income households and young professionals who are starting out into their careers as well, who are more likely to be renters than owners. And so certainly that has a negative income spillover to the broader community. I think part of it as well is that as more students proliferate throughout the community, that changes the dynamics within communities. We've seen in some university towns where there have been conflicts between the municipality and non-student residents, and then the students who are living in the broader community, where there have been issues of noise, issues of commotions, and issues of garbage in the communities and that sort of thing. So there really needs to be, I think, more emphasis on the benefits that can happen by building more housing for students, both on and off campus, and what the positive effects can be for communities by ensuring these students are adequately housed.
The feds cut way back in the number of foreign student visas that they are now going to allow. Will that solve the problem?
Well, I think that's certainly going to be part of the solution. When we look at how much that reduction has been showing up in the data so far, they've promised a 35% reduction this year. Universities across Canada have come out and said it looks more like 45%, and we've been hearing that anecdotally as well, just because of the uncertainty of what the future of the program looks like. And so that reduction in demand is going to take some pressure off. There's no question, but ultimately we need more supply. This doesn't just apply to student housing. It's the solution to the broader housing affordability crisis that we have in Canada. And so to do that, post-secondary institutions need to get greater access to affordable financing to invest in student housing, but also an ability to better partner with the private sector to be able to get access to that capital and those expertise in order to really accelerate the pace of building beyond what we've seen recently.
I think if the Minister of Colleges and Universities for the province of Ontario were here with us, that person would say, you know what, we've heard this message and we are doing our part to ensure that there is a bigger uptake among developers to build on-campus post-secondary accommodation. Are they doing enough?
Well, I think it's more than just on campus. So on campus is certainly part of it. There are a lot of lands that post-secondary institutions have access to that they can build on. But part of the story as well is in partnering with the private sector, there are a lot of costs that start going up for post-secondary institutions. So typically, universities and colleges pay reduced property taxes and other fees that are associated with building, including getting greater allowances from municipalities for zoning changes that they want to make. But once they start partnering with the private sector, then those costs start to go up. They don't get those same benefits from reduced property taxes. Zoning becomes more complicated. It's treated like a private asset instead of a public asset. And so greater accommodation needs to be made by municipalities and the province to allow for those pseudo-public-private partnerships to be able to happen to accelerate that pace of building.
Or should we just say no more of those private-public partnerships? Public sector, do it on your own.
Well, we could say public sector, do it on your own, but there are constraints that the post-secondary institutions are subject to, one of which is on the financing side. So there's that part of it, their ability to borrow and go to markets to be able to borrow. They will need to partner with the private sector to some extent. They're certainly not going to be building the assets themselves, and the operating side, it can be challenging for them as well. But ultimately, a lot of the expertise are in the private sector in terms of building and operating these assets. And when it comes to colleges, they're in a very unique situation in the province of Ontario where they actually are required to go to the province of Ontario to borrow first as the first lender that they have access to. And if the province of Ontario says, no, we're not going to be lending to you and you can't find a lower rate, then they're out of luck. They have to build new residences out of cash surpluses if they have them. And so there's certainly a lot of challenges that can be addressed pretty easily, I would argue, to reduce the barriers to getting financing to build these assets.
Okay, where is the lowest hanging fruit that presents a more immediate solution to this?
Well, I think the lowest hanging fruit is access to financing. So bringing down the cost of financing. We've seen the federal government has given access to post-secondary institutions now to build student housing at reduced costs from loans from the CMHC. That's a step in the right direction. We think the province of Ontario allowing colleges to have access to greater lending facilities to be able to build these capital assets is important. And we think for municipalities, bringing down the costs of building these and operating these assets over the long term, and working with post-secondary institutions when they bring in private partners to keep the cost down for students as much as possible. As long as those assets remain in the hands of those public institutions, then really those barriers we think should be non-existent, because it helps to support the broader community and bring down costs of living throughout the whole community.
Now, the Fed said many months ago they'd take the HST off purpose-built rental. Do you know whether that extends to on-campus construction as well?
Yeah, I believe it does extend to on-campus construction as well, and it's something that's been matched by the province on their side of things. And certainly it's something that we've heard from our clients that is going to help level the playing field between building more condos and building more purpose-built rentals. So it's helping to create arguably more incentives for building that type of housing.
Well, the interesting thing is, if you look at the market right now, there is no market for condo sales right now, but there is infinite demand for more spots, both on campus for students and close to campus for students. So you would think that if the market's listening and if governments are listening, all hands on deck. What's stopping it from happening?
No, absolutely. And I think that we are going to continue moving in that direction, certainly. And to your point on what's happening in the condo market and condo pre-sales, it's slumping in a very meaningful way, and a historically, unprecedented way. And so we are going to be moving in that direction. But because these assets take time to build, it's something that can be a bit of a slow-moving train. And a lot of people invested heavily into into condos, particularly during at the peak of the pandemic, when prices were very high. And so there's, I'm sure, a reluctance to necessarily make that adjustment in terms of price and listing at a lower price and taking a bit of a haircut on that. But we'll start to see, we think, as interest rates start to come down and we get more normalization in the Canadian housing market, that a lot of that still lingering pandemic effect is going to start to come out in the wash.
In our last 20 seconds here, tell me how long you think it will take to get the system to a place where you've got this covered.
Yeah, we think that if the federal government is able to restrain the number of student permits that they're going to be issuing to the level that they suggest, and we're able to bring in some of these benefits that come from lower financing costs, that sort of thing, that by the end of the decade we should be in a place where we have a more balanced market for student housing specifically, which will help to support a more balanced market for the rental market.
Gotcha. That's Randall Bartlett, Senior Director of Canadian Economics at Desjardins. We thank you for coming into TVO tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No one in this province should be without a family physician. It's almost unimaginable.
The family physician shortage in Ontario is staggering.
Being surrounded by family and friends who keep asking, like, can I be put on your list when you're done your schooling, right? Like, I think everyone is really in need of a family doctor right now.
It's really upsetting to me, and I really want to do something about it.
Right now, there's 6.5 million people across Canada that do not have a family physician, and here in Ontario, that number is 2.5 million. It's quite staggering.
First of all, we have family physicians who are basically with the administrative burden on them. It is unprecedented. And then you have students who are coming into the system and looking at the stress that the family programs, the family medicine programs are going through and deciding that this is not the life for them. But in addition to that, we have the burnout, which is significant, and we also have the retirement. So because of that, we have a lot of members within the society who really do not have family physicians.
So the Queen's Lakeridge Health MD Family Medicine Program was created. It was really a vision by our current dean, Dr. Jane Philpott. And it's the first medical education program in Canada to deal with the shortage of family physicians that we're experiencing right now.
I think this is a perfect time for introduction of this program. Because of the crisis that we're going through, we do not have primary care physicians. We have a rising population. We have complexity of conditions, but at the same time, we do not have enough primary care physicians. And this program actually, with its uniqueness, addresses the major issue that we are going through. When you look at our organization, we are an integrated system of care. And we feel that it's very important that our patients are not only within the walls of the hospital, but actually their treatment is closer to home. And in addition to that, our Durham region is expanding in size, it's expanding in population, and it's also expanding in diversity. And we know that this is happening. And the fundamental thread that puts all this together is having a very strong primary care system within, not only in the Durham region, I'm using the Durham region as an example, but actually when you think about the province, you think about the nation.
So the MDFM program addresses that in a couple of ways. For starters, we have a unique curriculum design. So aside from getting the foundational knowledge you need in medical school, plus the practical clinical skills, we've actually designed our curriculum to have a family medicine and primary care lens. So right from day one in first year of medical school, there's early exposure to family doctors. And we do this a few different ways.
Most medical schools, your first 2 years are kind of your pre-clerkship years where you're doing a lot of didactic, like in the classroom learning, and it's not until third and fourth year that you really get a lot of experience with patients. Whereas in this program, right from the beginning of first year, we've had opportunities to work with patients in clinics. So we've had a half-day mentorship program right from the beginning where we're paired with a family doctor in the community, and we go there every week for half a day throughout the whole year.
We have a community week in January where we go to a rural community and we kind of just get thrown in there and we get to see patients, sometimes even on our own, and then we report back to our preceptor or the family physician that we're observing, kind of give them a history, what we learned on physical exam with the patient, and then go back in the room together and kind of see the patient and see, like, if I did all the correct exams, did I ask the right questions, did I come to the right even diagnosis sometimes, and I think that's really awesome to be able to say you're already doing that in first year. And then we also get a community month in May, so that's an entire month, kind of a similar concept. Whereas most other medical schools in Ontario right now only get a community week.
Once they're accepted into the program and they carry through, they don't have to go through the competitive residency matching program like you have to do at every other medical school. They automatically get a position to train in family medicine at Queen's, which takes a lot of pressure and stress off from going into that matching service.
I've found that really decreases stress knowing that your spot is secured and allows you to just focus on learning as much as you can rather than doing things like outside of medicine, that like research or things to build your resume. You can do that still if you want, of course, but you don't need to. You can just focus on making the experience the best it can be for yourself and what your needs are.
Our patient got a chest tube in the ER. I got to flush this in.
The clinical experience is a pro in this program, and that we get way more in first year than you do in a traditional program, which are more lecture-based. And similar to that is that we do case-based learning rather than lectures for the majority of our medicine course learning. So what that looks like is we go through cases in small groups, and we're a class of 20, so we get divided into 3 groups, and each group gets about 2 tutors, and we just go over cases that you would typically see in a clinic. So it's very like real life scenarios versus lectures, I find sometimes can be more like black and white and like this is what's normal, this is what's pathological, versus in the case-based learning you just kind of see real life patients, you get to know a bit about them, their backgrounds, and then you also see a lot of patients have comorbidities and not just like one issue at hand. And I think learning in that way helps in the real world when you actually get put into a clinic with like real patients with comorbidities.
As a guinea pig, which I don't know if I really like that one because there's such a negative connotation to guinea pig, but I've had a great time in this program, and I know that being in a new program can be scary because you don't know what's going to happen, but I also think it's a really cool privilege to be able to be that first group because you get to work with the faculty to kind of make it better, and our faculty have been awesome for soliciting our feedback because they really want this program to work well.
Lakeridge Health history as a teaching hospital is not new. We've gone into a trajectory for many, many years. And we started with working with some universities, but eventually we had programs which were built within Lakeridge Health System. Today we are a Queens campus, and we also have the Learn Center, which is where we are interviewing.
So we turn on the defibrillator, you will see a shockable rhythm. See? It's VFib, so it means shockable.
Our commitment to education, to academia is not new. And we are actually evolving more and more. And the way we see ourselves actually is that we are an academic center within a community-based healthcare system. That's who we are.
So as a family physician, what we would love to do full-time is just spend all the time we have in front of a patient taking care of them. The continuity of care, sort of like birth to grave relationship we have with our patients, it's what I absolutely love about being a family doctor. However, part of being a family doctor involves other things administratively, like running a practice, running an office, paying your staff, making sure the lights are on. So all of those practical things take administrative and leadership skills. So our mentorship program, where we assign our medical students with a family physician in the community, they start to have these conversations early on so that people know that once they're finished medical school and they go into residency and then they're ready for their career, they know how to manage their office. They also learn how to balance different skills that you need to be a family doctor. So we don't just work in an office practice. We do other things like palliative care, long-term care. Some of us work in the emergency room. We deliver babies. So getting that work-life balance with your family life and other things you want to do is so important. We want to decrease stress. We want everyone to work hard and take care of their patients. But if you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to anybody. So we try to stress that balance early on. And by seeing it in real time with their mentors, they can get used to it right away, so it prepares them well when they start their career.
I have to give them a lot of credit, those students, to have that kind of forward thinking from day one when they are such a trajectory in their life and be dedicated to become family physicians.
There are lots of different reasons why I wanted to be a family doctor, but I think the first one, and probably the most strong reason, is I really like making long-term connections with people. And I think that that's something that you definitely get in family medicine. You get to see someone from when they're born all the way through as they go through their life.
Just the ability of family doctors to form such like long-term relationships with their patients and really get to know them. I think that improves the quality of care you can provide to people by already kind of knowing their backstory, knowing what they've been through, knowing what like determinants of health affect their lives, what medications they're on. It makes the process a lot more smooth rather than them having to go to emergency departments or like walk-in clinics and like having to meet new doctors every time. It seems like inefficient to me.
I was fortunate that I had a family doctor, but unfortunately when I was in my early 20s, she closed her practice. And I think it was really then that I realized how much that I had valued that relationship that I had built with her. And I kind of felt really lost and not connected to the healthcare system. So I think that being a family doctor to me is really about making those connections and also helping connect people to the rest of the healthcare system.
Being surrounded by family and friends who keep asking like, can I be put on your like list when you're done your schooling, right? Like, I think everyone is really in need of a family doctor right now. There's so many people, and I think that just keeps motivating me, and that like choosing family medicine addresses the biggest societal need in my opinion right now. Well, like 3 that count because 2 of them are the same.
What I'd like to see is our students become leaders themselves and advocate for other things that we need to solve the family medicine shortage problem, like, decreasing administrative burden for family doctors, advocating for more team-based integrated care where you work as a team with other healthcare professionals in Ontario and across Canada.
I look at this program almost like a triangle. And the triangle, you have three points to it. The first one is Lakeridge Health, which is an integrated healthcare system. You have a university, which is Queen's University. But those two cannot succeed without the community.
I'm obviously very hopeful that some of the problems that we're experiencing in family medicine will be solved over time. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of collaboration between physicians, the government, Ontario Medical Association, a lot of community stakeholders, etc. But while this crisis is going on, medical education has to continue. No one in this province should be without a family physician. It's almost unimaginable. Like, if you have a child who moves into an area with you in Ontario, can you imagine if the public school told them that they couldn't attend because there aren't enough spots? We would never stand for that. Everybody has the right to have primary care and a family doctor, and I think the people of Ontario have to continue to advocate in order to make sure that everybody has access to care.
Those students or those medical learners, if you will, is they will be amazing family physicians. I have no doubt in that. And in my old age, I hope one of them will take care of me, because I believe that those are the ones that will be phenomenal in serving the communities.
And that is the agenda for Thursday, September 12th, 2024. Tomorrow on the program, John Michael McGrath and I will dive into by-election politics in Prince Edward County as the Premier and the opposition leaders shower as much love as possible on the people of the Bay of Quinte. And we hope you'll be with us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.